Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Today's episode is my day 3 of the Layout a Day challenge. Today's story prompt is about something you've enjoyed learning, and the technique prompt is to use books or education symbols on your layout. And there's a bonus technique about putting a cat on there based on the story behind the prompt. So let's go ahead and dive in and see what I did with this prompt. I've been learning to crochet these little critters, and this process is called amigurumi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's a Japanese, originally from Japan, about the crocheting process of these little critters. So I have these two photos that I just snapped today, and specifically for this layout. And I just so happened to pick up this book print at my last shopping trip over the weekend. And so that was a happy coincidence that the prompt for today would fit perfectly with this paper. That happened to me yesterday too. Now these two photos are 6 inches wide because they're typical 4x6 inch prints, which would span the entire width of this page. And as you see here, I am going to gut this page because it's a brand new paper. I want to make the best use of it. So I'm going to trim my photos down and not have them go all the way across the page. And I'm using that gutted portion of the paper because the back side is a text alphabet print, which goes very well with the theme. And so I've got books and I've got this kind of alphabet print going on. So I think I've covered the technique theme at this point. I wish I had remembered about the cat part when I was making my layout, because I could have easily gotten a cat onto this page. So anyway, to cover up that gutted out portion, I decided to go with a pink that is part of my little crochet animal. So I used pink paper, which has a subtle tone-on-tone star print to it. So I've got the base of my layout done, and now I'm trying to decide how I want my photos to go. And because they're not quite the same size, because I trimmed them as small as I could get and still keep the images intact, I decided to offset them and not put them side by side, and that way you don't notice that they're different sizes. And then I turned to some embellishing and my title work, and I didn't really know where I was going to go with this layout, so I had this idea of using those little lawn fawn critters, which the lawn fawn stamp sets are usually great for building scenes on cards, but they're harder to use for scrapbooking. So I knew this would be the perfect page to get in those tiny stamps. And then I wanted to build a scene also with a stamp set from a company out of Canada. She's a one-woman business owner and creates her own stamps, and I'll leave more information about her below, and I'll talk more about that as I get to that. So I am doing my title, and I wanted to really use those larger letters, but they just weren't fitting. So I pull out my stamps and I arrange them around the page to try and see how much room things are going to take up to give me an idea about where to place my title. And I decide just through this process of kind of moving it around that right there in the middle is actually going to be a nice spot for it, because it gives me a vertical column nestled above and below that title for a journaling block, and then space down on that bottom right corner for a little stamped scene that I'm going to do. And so that was not something I ever expected to do, and just the process of thinking and shifting led me to this idea and solution, because none of the letters were going to fit in the spaces that I had intended. All right, so I'm making sure that my the second word in my title is going to fit in there just fine, and there's no problem with that. So I go ahead and get those down, and I do go with a purple, which is a color of yarn that I'm using for my project. And then I'm ready to stamp. Now I've used my Gina K Amalgam Black ink because I wasn't sure if I was going to Copic color these or watercolor these or what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to stamp and color these pieces to make this scene. And there's that stamp set down there with the easy chair and the side table with a stack of books. And here I'm going to add a little coffee cup onto there, because this is what I look like when I'm crocheting. I'm kicked back in my recliner chair, and I've got my crochet in my lap and a cup of coffee on my side table. I'm letting that ink take a little time to dry because it is waterproof and Copic proof once it's dry, but it does take a minute or two to get to that point. So I pull out my journaling stamp and I mask off some areas and stamp some journaling around my title. And then I'm ready to color, and I decide I want it to be super easy because I stamped these images on cardstock and not on watercolor paper. I knew watercoloring wasn't going to be a good choice. However, watercolor pencils would work. So I'm just doing a quick, sketchy watercolor pencil coloring in here. And once I've finished up with these watercoloring, I pull out this Dove blender pen. Now, it's not exactly full of water. It's got some kind of thicker fluid in it. I don't know what it is, but it helps blend out that watercolor. And because it's not super wet, it's easier on the cardstock than using a paintbrush and actual water would be. And so I find that I like the blender pen for doing this kind of little coloring. And you can touch the tip of the blender pen directly to the watercolor pencil tips, and that will help pick up more concentrated color. And I just scribble off the blender pen on the blank white space to clean my tip in between colors because I don't want to cross-contaminate. And I just enjoy this process of smoothing out those lines. Now, it does retain some of the rougher texture of a watercolor pencil, but that's okay with me. And I just kept it really simple with minor shading to these images. And then I'm ready to fussy cut these. Now this did all take me a little while, but I found it kind of soothing to color and cut out the images, so that was fine. And now I am arranging all my images to make little scenes on my page. And my main scene down there, of course, is me sitting in my easy chair. And then I knew I wanted to punch circles from the leftover of that text print. And so I get those and I stack up my critters, and I'm thinking that's not enough. It needs something else. So I find a scrap of pink paper from my stash, and yes, matting those little circles was more texture and color, and it's what it needed. So then I pop up my little critters on foam dots and I place them in the circles, and that bunny is bugging me because the bunny is staring off the edge of the page. So I leave the bunny there and I move on to the next part, which is printing. I used Wikipedia to print out the definition of what amigurumi means. And because I'm posting this to my scrapbook group for this challenge, I thought that would be a nice touch in case people have never heard of this before, because there certainly was a time when I didn't know what it was. And I printed it out too big at first, so then I had to go back and print it again. I did measure, but as they say, measure twice and cut once. I did not measure twice, so I had to redo that. But that's okay. That's how it goes. And I'm struggling with, I wanted to get these little corner tabs on each corner of that definition, but it just wasn't fitting. That's okay. So then I'm working on that bunny again, and I'm just trying to decide what to do with that bunny. So I go ahead and pop her up with my foam dots, and I'm going to move her around the page. And then I had this idea of, well, what if she is a little bunny crochet that I'm working on, and she's sitting somewhere next to me, maybe on the floor because I keep my crochet box on the floor, maybe she's on my lap because I'm working on her. And then I decided to go ahead and replace that mug on the desk with the bunny because the little stamp lady has a mug in her hand already. So that was cute and made sense. And then I'll leave that little circle up there as her little shelf that she'll move to when she's all done being crocheted. So there was a method to my madness. And then I wanted some real texture on this page, something fibrous to go with the crochet theme. And I pulled out these pom-poms, which I actually put into my scrapbook kit that I built at the beginning of this month. And that was perfect. And then a couple of sprinkles of enamel hearts, and then I find that that is the finishing touch that this page needed. And I'll leave you with some close-up photos here. And you can see my little display areas for each little crocheted critter. And I left that circle blank for the bunny to fill in later. I hope you enjoyed this layout process video. I will be back tomorrow with day 4 of this load challenge. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, day 2 at the very beginning explains what load is. And I will leave you links and explanations in the show notes as well. I will see you next time.